So we had
Oh.
12 people to one bathroom. And I have these very vivid memories of I'm in the shower in this like really, really decrepit bathroom, and someone is next to me washing a basket of fish as like giant cockroaches are like climbing down from the sides of the shower. And so you never really learn, like, it was like you're in the bathroom. The girl who sat in front of me, whose name is Cara Benson, and the only reason I remember this is because of 9/11,
Mhm.
turns around and looks out the window behind us and she says, "Oh my God, a plane just went into the World Trade Center." So now, of course, we're all running to the window and looking at what's happening. So we're just standing there, teenagers, no
Mhm.
one knows what's happening. The school had TVs in every room. So eventually the teachers turned on the TV to see what was happening. You can tell your brain to think about this differently. Clearly they're not there yet, but this ability to believe that you can control, like you can control your feelings, you can control how your mind. And it seems like such simple advice, but it's very common, especially from like sort of the Chinese. It's just like, yeah, you just need to go. In fact, a lot of Eastern medicine is like that. So my job primarily is to generate originations, which is essentially we make loans to small
Yeah.
businesses, right? So I own the P&L from like a sales perspective.
Mhm.
I expanded my role in the past few years into also chief strategy officer because I was leading the generative AI transformation of the company, which is honestly like, as I'm speaking to you, I am sitting in a conference center at exec MBA at Wharton on general AI and business model transformation.
Did you know there's a technology that's actually an app on your phone that uses sound waves to tell your brain what you want your brain to do? We had a young man that was on a guest on our podcast, the Mike Litton Experience, who had a traumatic brain injury. He was sleeping 3 hours a night. He's using Newcalm now and he's sleeping more. Go to newcalm.com, Mike15 promo code. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. Mike is passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
MJ, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton
So
Experience. I'm
thank
super
you for
excited.
having me.
Sorry, I'm super excited for our time together. And like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So, with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go up to today, and then we want to talk about what you're doing with Credibly and how you're helping small businesses to obtain the financing that they need. Thanks again for being here.
I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Mike.
So, where were you born?
I was born in a little city called Shanghai, China. Actually, no, it's one of the mega cities of the
It's a
world.
big
Um,
little city.
one of the largest cities in the world. And I grew up there and I immigrated to New York when I was about 8.5, 9 years old. And I have lived pretty much everywhere along the East Coast in the major cities. And now I'm based out of Detroit.
So, is there anywhere in particular that you lived for quite a while, or was it sort of different cities all during your childhood?
Well, in my childhood, I mostly spent in Shanghai. So I was up there. I was in Shanghai till about 7, and then I spent a year in Xi'an, China. That was when my parents both were in the States. So when I was in China, my mom actually left for the States when I was 3 years old. So she really put down roots in New York. So I don't have a memory. I didn't have a memory of my mother until I met her when I was like 8. Right.
Wow.
So, yeah, so I was really in that very sort of important time of my life. I was raised by my dad and the relatives that were hanging around because China, since the late 1970s, had a one child policy.
Hmm.
And so I was an only child. Everyone around me was an only child. And it was basically 12 people to like one floor. So we had 12 people to one bathroom. And I have these very vivid memories of I'm in the shower in this like really, really decrepit bathroom, and someone is next to me washing a basket of fish as like giant cockroaches are like climbing down from the sides of the shower. And so you never really learn, like, it was like you're in the bathroom, you maybe get 2 minutes before somebody else interrupts you because there were essentially 10 adults and 2 kids that were living in this very cramped space.
Hmm.
And I slept on the floor for most of my childhood because we didn't have space.
Wow. So when you come to the US, where do you go in the US?
So my parents first settled in Sunnyside in New York City.
Okay.
And that was when I moved into this, like, to me back then, this like super spacious, like 1 bedroom apartment, right? Where I like still slept on the couch, but I was like, oh my goodness, if there's no more 12 people. We still had cockroaches though. And so, so I went to public school. I went to 150, which was within walking distance. And I remember having to go to school and just walk there alone and back. And I was in English as a second language for about a year and a half. And then we moved to Forest Hills in New York for a better school district. And we lived in a condo. My parents actually still live in that condo. So it's been 20 plus years.
Wow.
And I actually went to like 7 schools before I went to college. So a
Wow.
lot of transitioning, and I would go to a school for a year or two, and either we would move or I would take a test and get into a better school. And that just continued to happen until I went to undergrad at Harvard.
So, okay. So why, what happened? So it was moving. You guys were moving a lot. Is that what made you end up in 7 different schools?
It was actually, we only moved once, but in 3rd and 4th grade, I was at one school. Then we moved in 5th grade to Forest Hills. And that elementary school only went to 5th grade. So in
Hmm.
6th grade, I went to Halsey, which was a middle school. And then 7th and 8th grade, I went to Hunter, which was a school you had to take a test to get into. So I would be on the subway, at, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning, getting to school at like 8 something in Manhattan. And then after 8th grade, there was another opportunity to take another standardized test. I was very good at taking tests, apparently, and went to Stuyvesant, which was right by the former World Trade Center.
Okay.
Um, which, so my senior year was 2001. So you can imagine that was a
Wow.
very grateful year for me. Yeah, we were eyewitnesses to the entire September 11th because the school was so close to the former World Trade Towers. Um, so that's why it was it was only one move, but it was a lot of like using academics as a way to get ahead, right? And try to get into better and better schools because my parents obviously couldn't afford private school. They barely spoke like English at the time. And so really pushing myself to try to get into better education systems.
What were they doing? What did they do for a living?
So my mom was a registered nurse who worked
Mhm.
nights, and my dad, when I first came to the States, he delivered Chinese food, and then later he ended up having a he ended up having a souvenir shop in Greenwich Village,
Hmm.
which of where he sold like I'm gonna say fake purses and T-shirts and various recreational drug paraphernalia, and so which was, it's part of the Greenwich Village appeal. Um, and then he worked in the post office. But most of my weekends were actually from middle school to high school. I would actually go to my dad's store, right? So I would go there on Friday. It would be till 2, 3 in the morning because that's when retail was happening in that side of New York. I would go there for a full day on Saturday and sometimes half a day on Sunday.
Hmm.
So I did not have like a normal sort of teenage life socialization growing up. I didn't go to any parties. I didn't know that parties existed. I had some friends, maybe I had sleepovers once in a while, but most of my time was really spent just helping out at my dad's store during those years.
And homework.
Lots of homework. Yeah,
Lots of
because of the
homework.
school. Yep.
So, can you, for a second, share with us what 9/11 was like from your perspective?
Absolutely. And I will tell you, just like with all episodic memory, I remember that day as clear as it was yesterday,
Mm.
right? Because of so how sort of emotional it is. So
Yeah.
it was, I was in AP Bio, Advanced Placement Biology, at that time with this brilliant teacher at Stuyvesant. His name is Dr. Udding. He was a British accent. People loved him. He was just super tough teacher, but funny and quirky and really loved bio. And it was in between 2 periods. So around 8:40, at that time was when we started at 8. and classes ended at 8:40. Then you took a break, and then it was 8:50 till 9:20, something like that. It was during that break. Students were kind of hanging out, and all of a sudden we just feel the building shake, right?
Mm.
And it was kind of weird. Like, is this an
Your
earthquake?
building.
Like, what's happened? Yes, our school building
Wow.
shake. And so no one knew what happened. And then the girl who sat in front of me, whose name is Cara Benson, and the only reason I remember this is because of 9/11,
Mhm.
turns around and looks out the window behind us, and she says, "Oh my God, a plane just went into the World Trade Center." So now, of course, we are all running to the window and looking at what's happening. So we're just standing there, teenagers, no
Mhm.
one knows what's happening. The school had TVs in every room. So eventually the teachers turned on the TV to see what was happening. At that point, though, the second plane hits. And now I think everyone was like, this is not just an accident.
Mhm.
Something very, very tragic is happening. But of course, again, being 16, 17, didn't really have a perspective of what that meant. And then another teacher came into the room and talked to Dr. Udding, and she was like, people are jumping out of buildings. And he like gave her a hug, and she was crying. And now we're all like looking at people jumping out of buildings, which is kind of surreal for how young we were at the time.
How
Again,
far away were
that
you?
time we were about 4 blocks away. And so it was
Oh,
very close. Like,
goodness.
I walked by those buildings every night because I would have after school activities, and I would remember walking down the steps of Stuyvesant, which had a bridge. This still is there today. And then like down the stairs, and you can see over the blocks, you can see, right? Like in the former World Trade Center at night, the buildings are lit up. And it
Mhm.
was gorgeous. It was like these brilliant little fireflies in the at
Mhm.
night, and they were always a beacon of like, oh, like it's really late. I'm a student about to get on the train. I'm not going to get home until 7 o'clock. It's winter in New York, and these lights are
Mhm.
beautiful. They're lighting up the sky. And so then we went to our second class, which was homeroom. And my psychology teacher, this like grumpy man called Dr. Farbstein, he was there. He was just kind of like looking at us, panicking. And what was really interesting was the TV was on. I was by the library, and I remember taking a break, and looking up at the TV, and the first building starts to collapse.
Mhm.
And as it collapses, the TV goes into sort of white noise and shuts off.
Mhm.
And then you turn 90 degrees to the window, and you saw a continuation of what was happening on the screen.
Mhm.
So then I think people really started to, a lot of students were crying. I, for some reason, was not. I also remember going to the sixth floor where they had these huge windows by the library. And I was just standing there, just trying to like kind of gather myself a little bit,
Mhm.
maybe be a little bit reflective about what's going on. And all of a sudden, just looking at, basically Wall Street at that time, these people just running out, right? Like men, women at that time in suits. So everybody was black and white. They looked like very fit penguins, just like running down the street, pouring out a street, and then like massive sort of dust storms
Mhm.
coming behind them. So finally, we got the clear. We had to leave the building because they were afraid the second building was going to topple and hit the school.
Mhm.
National Guard was around, and then we left and walked up West Highway and ended up going to the MetLife building with like Snoopy on top at the
Mhm.
time. That's when we were able to call our parents. Nobody had cell phones then, so it was like everybody around one conference room using the phone. The subways were shut down, so like nobody could go home. So I didn't get home till like 4 o'clock that afternoon because they opened the train back up around 3.
Mhm.
And then we didn't go to school for a week, and then we had to share a school with another specialized high school, and that was really interesting. So
Wow.
memorable day.
Yeah, no kidding, right? I mean, you basically had a front row seat.
Hmm.
So, how did that experience that day shape you? How did it affect you?
Well, I think that there's a few things. So my now husband, who was also a student at the school, in the morning was in the bottom of the World Trade Center, Chambers Street. So when he got out, there was no one there because at that time the first plane had already hit. So he was like, "This is strange. I better leave," because he was playing hooky. So he left, right? And we talked about this later, and it was such a like these small sort of chance happenings in life that kind of can
Mhm.
take you in one direction or
Mhm.
another. I think the other thing that made me really be aware of from based on this experience was that like in a moment of crisis, which I think we all face, whether it's emotional, physical, mental, right? Everybody will have times when there's just enormous amounts of pressure and uncertainty. I always default back to that one time when I was standing there and watching everybody really just freak out, right? I mean, we're teenagers. There were girls that were just like collapsing and being hugged by their boyfriends. And I remember just being very calm and being kind of like, look, if something were to happen, at least we're all in this together. And
Mhm.
so for me, the quieting moment or the stillness of that experience wasn't so much like how much you should value life, which obviously I think most people took out of like, hey, life is stochastic. You have to be appreciative of all these opportunities. But the fact that like there are moments where if you can find connections that really bond you to other people, whether it's through trauma or through um, just an experience like this, right? That people are not fundamentally alone. And I think that that's something, as modernity kind of strikes civilization, there's a lot of talk about deeper connections and whether
Mhm.
you feel alone, whether you're alone in what you're going through. But when you go into real crisis mode, people are looking around at other people to be like, we are a collective. And that I think really shapes and has shaped how I interact and reach out to other people. Because fundamentally, I really believe there's an underlying connection that people can tap into when things get really desperate. That we are always looking for other people when things get really desperate.
That's amazing. That's
Thank you.
absolutely amazing. So one of the things we talk about a lot on this podcast is connection and leadership and parenting, which I think is sacred leadership, that kind of thing. Um, so you got out, got on the subway, and you got home at 4.
Yep.
There was no traffic in and out, right? For
No, there was nothing. Everything was completely blocked and held to a standstill, right? And it was a very eerie moment getting on the subway with all these strangers, but everybody kind of knows what's going on. And like everyone's experiencing the same moment, but
Mhm.
differently.
Yeah.
But there's this strange resonance you have with that community at that time where like you know what they're going through, they kind of know what you're going through. No one's on their phones yet, right? So everybody's kind of being sort of like trying to check in with each other and talking to each other. And so that was also just kind of strange where you can kind of be among a group of strangers, know that they care about you and you care about them, and then you'll never see them.
Yeah.
So, which is great, which is also interesting. So,
Like a shared experience that
right.
almost bonds you to an extent, like
Yeah.
you can lean on each other and that, you know what I mean? That's just
Yeah. In that moment.
that's just incredible. Absolutely incredible. So after 9/11, was your campus damaged?
Yeah, so the Stuyvesant High School was actually used as an emergency personnel ground for months
Mm.
after. So I remember my friend Zenzen and I snuck back into the school. Oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing, but I think I'm just gonna tell it. She had her violin in the locker, and she was like, I think either first chair or one of the first chairs, and she loved her violin. She wanted to practice, so she went
Mhm.
and got her violin back. I had my college applications in my locker.
Mm.
And I was like, "I can't miss this deadline," So I was like, "I need to get my stuff out of the locker." So I mean, can you imagine these 2 girls who are like 16 and 17 going back into this building which is blocked off, and you have all this, like, asbestos and stuff, right? You got firefighters and policemen sleeping, like, in the building because they were using it as a ground for rescue, and us just feeling an inordinate amount of, like, guilt for being like, I care about this thing that is so particular to me, and yet I know no one else cares about. And also, in the grand scheme of things, like it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Like thousands of people have died, and you're going to go and get your college application. Like, even though I recognize the absurdity of this argument, I bore the shame and I did it anyway. So I live with that. I got my essays out on time. but just being aware of how like inconsequential that was. Um, but still, right, applying to college for a senior is one of the most important things in your life. But at that moment, I think this is very true with COVID as well, where like something else grander is happening beneath you, and you have to make real decisions about what really matters, and then recognize the weight it actually plays in the grand scheme of things. So I think one of the things that taught me is just like I don't get too hung up on things. I'm not the kind of person who stresses out and just says like this is the most important thing ever. Like it's truly not. I kind of get into it and then I back out and then I move on. So
Kind of changes your perspective.
yeah, yeah, because when you're looking at trying to retrieve a college essay next to people who are literally losing their lives in front of you, you kind of recognize that like you're not that significant.
And a violin.
Yeah, and if I like your worries are just not that important to the universe.
In your world though,
Right.
that was an important thing at that time.
Yes, but I think having that awareness of the greater perspective is one of the most clarifying things people can do for themselves, right? I often talk to a lot of people, and speaking on this like very deep connection, right? People are always sort of, like one of the things I sort of tell people to do is like there's a Chinese saying that says, if you take a step back, then mountains and oceans open up. And I go back to this quote that Carl Sagan said about the pale blue dot, which is one of my favorite images, where it's basically Earth as it appears 6 billion kilometers in space. And it's just a pale blue dot shine in the emptiness of the universe. And he kind of talks about how, like, every single drop of blood, like everything we have ever done as a civilization to fight and squabble and claim resources is for not even the whole blue dot, but like a fraction of that small thing in the universe. And I just love that idea. And when people are telling me like, they're like, "How come, like, you seem to sort of be pretty resilient and bounce back from things?" Um, I just say, like, because ultimately, life is so short, and then just having the opportunity to get a glimpse of it while you're here, like, that's a gift. Like, I fundamentally believe that, right? I understand there's everybody has their struggles, but I'm always able to come back to that position and say to myself, this is a gift, right? Life is not perfect. It's painful. It's full of suffering. There are a lot of challenges, but you get a glimpse of this intelligent world made by intelligent life form and so many other like universes and planets. Like no one has that. You get a one brief second of a glimpse, and I will always default to that as being like philosophically, that's like a very foundational thing for me.
That's so cool. I'm so glad we talked about this. So so after high school, so you rescued your essays,
Oh my gosh, yes.
you got your applications in, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
And you're accepted to Harvard.
Hmm. Yep.
Can you talk about that for a second? How did your
Yeah.
parents react when you were
Uh,
accepted to Harvard? I mean, I mean, wow.
yeah. So interestingly enough, I think a lot of Asians have the reputation of having parents who are like tiger parents. My parents were not really like that. Their English skills were limited. So after a certain while, after fourth grade, basically, I was on my own academically. I just really, I think I think they indoctrinated in me like a work ethic. I've always loved to read. So I read a lot. I basically grew up in libraries. We didn't have any money for extracurriculars. So I went to Harvard. I was accepted. And my mom first was like, do you have to go because this other school gave you a full scholarship and this is like a lot of money? And I'm like, well, they also gave me a lot of money. And yes, I think I would still really like to go. So she was like, okay, fine. So she obviously, we got a lot of financial aid and merit based scholarships. And so my parents were able to support me. I worked 3 jobs at Harvard to basically earn my like books, like room and board, miscellaneous. They paid for the part of tuition at that time. And I was a lit major in undergrad, which I know is super sexy. No, I think not, definitely not. But I would tell you, being a public school kid at Harvard, it's only in hindsight that I realized that there's some interesting, jagged kind of experiences that you had. A lot of my friends were public school kids. They worked really hard, really zero sense of sort of privileged, right? Immigrant families. There was a lot of other kids who, when we graduated, their parents were helping with their cover letters and resumes. I was like, I'm going to guidance counselor because I don't know how you do that, right? Like there was no way that my parents were going to be able to help me. But I loved Harvard because I would tell you there are two things that I love about Harvard. One is I met people who are standard deviations above me in terms of intelligence. I
Mhm.
was always, I always got the best grades, like wanted to be really smart in high school. Once I met people for whom they're truly on like genius level, like people you only read about, right? You're like, how does like a mind like Newton and like Da Vinci even exist in human history? Then you meet them as 18-year-olds and you're like, oh, right, because you guys are 0.001%. So out of that experience, I was never intimidated by people who are really intelligent ever again. And when I would enter my
Because
professional
you
life,
hung with them.
as I hung with them and I realized like I'm never gonna be that person, right?
Mhm.
And they're also like tremendously unhappy a lot of the times because they're just too smart. So in high school, my standard for success was like I don't want to be mediocre in anything. Anything that I was gonna do, I was gonna do really well. If I'm not good at it, like I'm not doing it, right? So it created this like risk aversion as well because you were only going to pursue the things that you're really good at. So your intellectual curiosity was very circumscribed to like what can I pursue that's always going to give me the best grades, and I was always going to be the strongest speaker in class. After I met those people, I was like, I'm never going to be as smart as them. So I felt very liberated to be intellectually curious and to pursue the major like I actually wanted to pursue, which was like related to books and not have to worry about where is this going to take me in the future. And so having encounters with people who are so far above you, not only is it humbling, but it's very gratifying because you start to realize like it's okay to have limitations. And in fact, like it's good to know where your limitations are. The other thing I love about Harvard was I loved being literature, right? And when people ask me, like, hey, given what you do now, which is you work in sort of fintech and finance and you're the chief strategy officer, would you go back and do the same thing? I'm like 100% yes. And the reason is I fully believe that at some point in a young person's life, when you are pursuing your passion, even if your passion never translates into something professional, you have to know what it feels like for your heart rate to go up. You have to know what it feels like to feel excited and energized and motivated because that will serve as your North Star to like what you actually end up wanting to do.
Mhm.
I never made use of my literature degree in the sense that like I didn't go into journalism, I didn't go into writing. I still write. Writing is
Education,
one
that
of my
kind of thing, yeah.
favorite things. I still write fiction on the side, but what I do use it is when I read great books. I also recommend people read great books. When I read great books, right, and we go back to that human connection, fiction is very, very good at addressing the complexities of humans. And so that gave me the kind of empathy and ability and desire to connect with people in a way that I would never be able to do that had I not sat down and read difficult books, right? Because those are the really difficult things that you have to look at and you have to think about these characters and you have to analyze them and they appear so real to me sometimes that I almost feel like I know them better than real people. And I take that with me when I think about how I ask questions, how I talk to people, the passion that I try to bring to a conversation. And I started to value how do I think about creating meaning in my life, right? What do I use as my metrics of success? Is it my salary? Is it my title? Is it the office I sit in? And I often tell people starting in my 20s, because of these experiences at Harvard, I value my day and my year by having, did I have a great conversation today? Did I make a genuine connection this year with another human being, right? Those are fundamentally my metrics for have I lived a meaningful year? And I have carried that with me since I was like 21 and I've never regretted it. It's always taken me to really profound places, but I wouldn't know how to set those KPIs early in my life had I not decided to pursue great books and also just like listen to my physiological reaction to how I was feeling and being excited and passionate and motivated.
So for people that are we're in 76 countries now worldwide. We just picked up
Yeah.
Mongolia, by the way,
Oh, awesome.
of
Beautiful
all
country.
places, right?
Yeah.
For people that don't know what a KPI is, can you explain that for a second?
Yeah, yeah. It's basically like your metric, your key performance indicator, which is like a metric that you use. Usually in business, it's like, oh, what's your revenue? What's your whatever cost
close
per
rate, conversion
yeah,
rate, that kind of
sure,
thing.
things like that, conversion. So the things that how do you measure success? So I talk about what's your personal KPI, right? Is it how much money you've made? Is it how many friends you have? Is it, did you buy a second home, right? Like, are these sort of fundamentally, what are your material ones? What are your spiritual ones? What are the things that really matter? So I think everybody should have a personal set of KPIs that I think are really meaningful to them so they know what their goals are beyond sort of your professional and even personal goals. Like, truly, I think these are like your spiritual goals.
So we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to finish talking about Harvard, and then we're going to talk about Credibly. And we also want to talk about Gen AI, which I know is a big subject with you. We'll be right back. Did you know there's an app that has no side effects that allows you to use sound waves to tell your brain what you want it to do? It's called newcalm.com, and it's amazing. It literally uses sound waves. If you want to tell your brain to go to sleep, if you want to tell your brain to recover, if you want to tell your brain to put you in peak physical state, if you want to tell your brain to focus, if you want to tell your brain to take a power nap, you can do all of these things and more with newcalm.com. Go to newcalm.com today, promo code Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go there today. And we're back with MJ. Pardon me. Before the break, we were talking about personal KPIs, key performance indicators. And that, I feel like, is incredibly important. Let me ask you this. If somebody has a set of personal, not professional, personal KPIs, why do you feel like that's important to continue to monitor that?
Great question. It is because I think having a set of personal KPIs and monitoring over time what they are and how they change, it forces you to continue to dive into yourself as an infinite being, right? And I truly believe the self is infinite. I preach this many times. I preach that self-awareness is really important. And I get asked the question, well, like, how do you become more self-aware? Like, there's things you have to do to become more self-aware. And having one of those things is having a set of personal KPIs, because then you are forced to ask yourself questions and challenge yourself. You get into a dialogue with yourself on, like, are these the right metrics? Have I been pursuing them? How does that make me feel? If it doesn't, then, like, should I be shifting my time over here? Because time is the ultimate currency, right? Time is actually what is one of the main things in the creation of meaning. And I personally believe that, especially as I get into the second half of my life, that giving your kids, for example, and giving yourself the tools to create meaning is incredibly important. In your 20s and 30s, everyone's sort of pursuing, their careers, they're trying to make money, they're trying to find their life partner. So it's pretty homogenous for a lot of people. But as you get older, things start to get more and more diverse, right? You've made decisions, those decisions that have consequences. And then I think at that point, when you're also have certain stability in terms of where you are, what you're doing, you end up asking maybe different questions than you had asked earlier. And I think having those KPIs over time and seeing how they change, driven by your values and the things that are important to you, it's important to validate, and also important to have some self-doubt. As I said, when I was in high school, I was very obsessed with being the best at what I was doing. And then when I got into college, that started to change, right? That started to change with being able to take risk and find out what I'm really motivated by. Now that I'm in the second half of, now my KPIs are really around connecting with people, coaching others, building the next generation of leadership, things that I wouldn't have thought of to be where I wanted to go. So they should change with you over time. They help you become more self-aware, but they also give you the foundational architecture to continue to create and deliver on meaning, which is what most people are striving for in the second half of their life.
Totally agree with that. So let me ask you this. If human beings are progressing and they have KPIs to show that they're progressing, are they happier?
So I'm gonna sort of challenge myself and you on this and say, is the fundamental goal or point of purpose of life to be happy? Or is happiness a byproduct of other experiences, right? My personal belief is that happiness is not a goal. It's a byproduct of resilience and experience. And so for me, and this comes through in a lot of my writing, and I'm actually going to write something for my kids, when you have curiosity and you have perseverance and you let meaning sort of be carved over time. So things that are important to you now are not as important to you 20 years down the line when you take a look back. Like that first girlfriend or boyfriend who broke your heart. Now I'm like, good for them, right?
Mhm.
So these things change. And so for me, happiness is a byproduct of being resilient and being open to experience. And openness is actually very important because I also hold a very deeply held belief that life will give you something to care about if you let it.
Mhm.
Despite all the tragedies I've seen, I've seen, obviously there's all kinds of tragedies in the world. I fundamentally believe that, like, even though people are never the same after experiencing really terrible things, but the ability and the capacity to care is one of those things that make us human. And if you don't let go of that, then ultimately life will give you something that allows you to tap into that. And so happiness as a goal is something that I think we've been taught that when we were kids. Like, we just want you to be happy. I don't really know what that means. Does that mean you're content? Does it mean that you are always smiling? Right? Because the ability to sit with difficult emotions without trying to like change or fix and just be able to sit still with them and let them, and also realize that like every single part of you, whether it's negative or positive, your insecurities, like all these things have a purpose. And I think that's one of the things where people don't, they're so like, well, the good parts of me have a purpose, but this other stuff I need to offload. Like, you don't. They actually have a purpose as well. The best example of that is the deepest human connections are forged by empathy through what? Not through people being happy together. It's through pain, right? And it's through pain, and it's through like understanding loneliness. That's when you find like real depth in connection. So yes, like your loneliness, your pain, your suffering, all these things that you want to get rid of, they have really profound purposes. And I want more people to accept that within themselves. I think that's what will make you happier. So
Very well said. I love it. Okay. Why would you pick literature as your major at Harvard? Can you walk us through that for a second?
Yeah, so I would tell you that I was not the best at math, even though I know I don't deliver on my stereotype. But I always loved to read, and reading was always an escape for me. I was a lonely child, I didn't have any siblings. My parents worked all the time, and so it was always a place where I could find another internal life,
Mhm.
right? And because the way our high schools are and how I worked in my dad's store, like I didn't have like friends I was hanging out with all the time and go into their, homes. I had great close friendships. I still have them today, but I spent a lot of time by myself.
Mhm.
So when you're spending a lot of time by yourself, the natural outlet before screens, and this is something that's very important in our culture today, is books. Books evoke the imagination, they take you to other places, you learn, right? It's still one of the only areas in reading and writing where I can lose sense of time. And I'm very type A person now. I live by my calendar and I organize everything. It's only in reading and writing that I sort of feel the pressure of time disappear when I get really absorbed in a great book. I also think just like I said about great literature overall is that like it does something to you that's very healthy.
Mhm.
And in fact, I was talking to a professor about this last night. One of the things that people are looking at, it was the advent of phones and stuff, is like people can't concentrate on reading anymore. And that's, I think, very dangerous, right? Because reading, not only do you have to sit, you have to think, you have to
Mhm.
be still, you have to be focused, but also you are in this other world and then this other narrative of which you're participating, right? So you're able to do all these things, but you're not always like, you're not bored. You're not like, I'm the center of the universe. How does everything come back and relate to me? Like you are fundamentally acting out these things that are very healthy, where you're participating in a different world. You're an observer, but you're not the center of the universe, which I think some of the social media culture kind of teaches us that we are like the center, right? But we're
Mhm.
not. And then you get to go on journeys with other people. And also because great literature is not afraid of complexity. The thing I don't like about a lot of business books and things like that is like they try to dumb things down. They're like, this is one way to think about it. Here's your framework, just execute it, everything will be perfect. But humans are by nature complex, and literature is really one of the only places, music, art, literature, the creative arts, that fully embrace that, right? Fully embrace that. And even with the advent of AI, you can see so much of AI is trained on text because it's the easiest manifestation of high level intelligence is language and text. And so for me, literature became a way. It just became an extension of myself. I was a better writer. I was a better speaker. I can understand people more. And then great books are hard. That's another thing. You have to think critically about them. This isn't like reading, your slasher fiction, which I also love. This is like, I have to sit and really think about what is going on here because this is Russian literature and I don't understand any of the names. And I would go to the professor's office and have these long conversations with him about what's going on at the time. So it forces you to reach for hard things. I was never a good athlete. I think people who are competitive athletes really have to push themselves. I am not athletically gifted. So where do I push my mind? I pushed my mind through books.
Mhm.
And it's the ultimate frontier because you can never go far enough because there's always more good writing out there.
It's infinite.
Infinite.
Yeah,
Infinite.
that's really cool. Okay, so you graduate from Harvard. What was that like for your parents?
So this is a great story, and I'm just gonna apologize to my mom in advance, but it's okay. She won't listen to the podcast. She doesn't really speak English that well. So
We need everybody to listen to the podcast.
yeah, I know exactly. So I'm not my mom. So my mom is she's very smart. She's very, very competent. My dad is much more empathetic. I try to draw on the good aspects of both. So when I graduated from Harvard, I graduated a year late. I took a year off and lived in China. So I didn't graduate with my class. So I never had like the senior experience either. My parents came to campus and I remember my mom sat me down. She was like, well, what you have proven is that you are very good at school, but you're about to go into the real world now. So let us now see your ability to actually execute what you've learned in school. That was the only thing. It was not like, congratulations, we're so proud of you. Like, there's none of that, right? It was just like, you prove that you're kind of a nerd and you're really good at studying and reading and taking tests. But now you're about to go into the workforce and now you got to like, can you be this other person? And I remember thinking this and being like, this is such a mom thing to say. Like, and I totally understood where she was coming from. Like, it wasn't meant to be mean or vicious or anything like that. But she was very good about always grounding me and being like, this is what I've seen about you. You now have a challenge of being this person. And by the way, like, I know I couldn't do anything for you. So you gotta prove it to yourself. I remember anytime I used to call my mom from school, and I would tell her about like, oh, like this drama happened, or I'm not feeling too great. It was never like, let's talk about your feelings. Let's have a deep exploration. She was, and this is like very typical advice from my mom, which I love. And I still even tell my kids, she would be like, yeah, that sounds not great. You need to just adjust yourself in Chinese, right? She'd be like, adjust yourself. And then I was like, you know what? I can adjust myself, So I always tell my kids too, I'm like, we don't need it. Just like, I know you feel kind of cranky right now. Adjust yourself. You can do it. Like it's fully within your control. You can tell your brain to think about this differently. Clearly they're not there yet, but this ability to believe that you can control, like you can control your feelings, you can control how your mind. And it seems like such simple advice, but it's very common, especially from like sort of the Chinese. It's just like, yeah, you just need to go. In fact, a lot of Eastern medicine is like that. If you go to an Eastern medicine doctor, right, they'll take your pulse and you're not like, oh, I have this specific illness, I need you to fix it. They'll be like, do you want something fixed or do you want to just kind of do an overall like adjustment? And you'll be like, I'll do an overall adjustment. And they give you a blend of herbs and you overall just adjust. Like, who knows what that means? But I think it's great.
It's an interesting perspective, though.
Yeah.
You need to adjust your perspective, right? Because everybody has a particular way that they look at things. Your mom's really something, man.
Yeah, my mom's sassy.
What a character. Okay, so you mentioned that you took a year off.
Yeah.
Why'd you take a year off and go to China?
So I was writing a thesis in Chinese. So literature at Harvard, you had to have multiple languages. And so I was working in Spanish language and I was working in Chinese language. And for me to write a good final thesis, on Chinese literature, I felt that I have to be part of where
Immersed.
the canon was born, right?
Yeah.
So, and it was interesting because, and this relates to like Credibly and later, like I have always been very drawn to marginalized narratives.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is like I kind of always try to notice the thing that like other people don't notice,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm sure, like I always cheer for the underdog. I think people do that as well. But I try, like my thesis in college was around like divorced women, like old men, right? Discarded people, basically.
Mhm.
People that were in Chinese literature at that time truly shunned. This isn't like 2000s where like divorce is really this is like 1970s 80s China where divorce is like major shame. So all of my writings were around stories told by those characters and their inner lives, which for a brief moment in Chinese literature around the 1970s, there was like a golden age of literature where writers were allowed to express some of these sentiments from alternative viewpoints. And then you kind of see the society takes shape and the censorship kind of come down. But there was a brief moment of just about 10 years where great writers were starting to get into these very introspective characters that are complicated. And so I went to China to do a scholarship, went to school there for a year, took no credits, met some of Chinese students, and then came back to Harvard and graduated, which was also living out what I did because when I graduated in my fifth year at Harvard, guess who my closest people were, like the people who got left behind and got kicked out of school for a year because they had some issues, right? And so like we became this like group of like super smart losers. I mean, it's just, and I hung out with them all the time and they're great. But
Almost
but
like
most
a group of
yeah,
outcasts.
it's like
Yeah.
it's our own little group. But it's exactly what made it so wonderful because I was writing about it and then I was also like kind of living it myself.
Wow, we could be here for a long time talking about all this, but so you end up going to work for Credibly, and you've been
Mhm.
there how long now?
So I've been there for about 5 years. So after Harvard, I worked for a couple years and went back to business school at Wharton. And then I joined Ford in their marketing program for about 8 years. And then I left Ford to do my own startup, which failed. And then the CFO of Ford Credit, who was my manager at Ford, his name is Mike Litton Experience. He worked in corporate strategy. We got along really well. So when he joined Credibly, he brought me in. That was about 5 years ago.
So you work at Credibly as Chief Strategy Revenue Officer.
hmm
Talk a little bit about that for a second. What exactly do you do for them?
Yeah, so I run marketing and sales. So my job primarily is to generate originations, which is essentially we make loans to small
Yeah.
businesses, right? So I own the P&L from like a sales perspective.
Mhm.
I expanded my role in the past few years into also chief strategy officer because I was leading the generative AI transformation of the company, which is honestly like as I'm speaking to you, I am sitting in a conference center at exec MBA at Wharton on general AI and business model transformation.
Hmm.
So this is something I'm very deeply excited about.
So you're back in
And personally
school.
invested in. I'm back in school for like a few days, and then I'm going back
Wow.
to work.
So
Um,
did you get your MBA from Wharton?
I did. Yep.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. I'm also rediscovered that I was not good at math. And then so I'm
Kind
leading
of
this
important in
generative AI.
business.
Yeah, kind of important. That's why I'm not on the finance side, but I do make loans. So I'm leading this generative AI transformation, which requires, I think, overall strategy and vision, because there's a lot of conversations on like the future of labor and what does it look like for the company, what does it mean to your customers, how have customer expectations changed, and it's such an amazingly not only disruptive but innovative force
Yeah.
that I think as a leader, right, as someone who is still aspiring to leadership, these are just super challenging and then super exciting problems to think about because they're truly going to push you to the edge of your capability.
So when does your conference end? When does your education end at?
It's only a few days, so it ends tomorrow at noon.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what's the most important thing you've learned so far?
Oh, oh my gosh, there are so many things. I'm trying to pick off the top few. I think I will say I will give one practical one and then I will give one maybe like philosophical one, right?
Okay.
The practical one is like almost the entire module is around the future of agents and what that means for business. So we understand how humans behave, but we're seeing agents very quickly come into commerce. And there's so much market research on how humans behave. There's no market research on how agents are going to behave, right? So it upends a lot of how we think about business and how we think about segmentation and how we think about how agents interacting with each other would make certain decisions when there's no humans involved. And so the idea of agentic types of workflows and what it means for your organization, is your organization prepared to handle these things? That's a big topic. Philosophically, the most important thing I always tell people, and I agree, and I've taken multiple sort of come back to the same idea, right? Is that right now, multiple businesses are using AI to do things better. Improvements in efficiency, increase productivity, lower your cost, increase your revenue. And the challenge that we all have to embrace, not only as business leaders, but I think as humans, is how do you use this to do better things? How do you use this to do things that were impossible, right? How do you use this to not just incrementally make your widgets a little bit better, but to invent like new things that are completely just, we can't even think of them. One great example a professor gave was like the art moment, where for years and years and years, so much of your European art was about making realism the top goal. So, you have 14th century was just flat, and then you had perspective, and then you had people that made marble look like soft clothes, right? And then you had Rembrandt, like you had all these things that were about being hyper realistic. And then Van Gogh and the Impressionist movement came, and all of a sudden it was about expressionism and feelings and creating these magical, eerie things that like made no sense to anyone because of the invention of cameras. So photography at that time really threatened the identity and existence of artists, because artists were all about being hyper realistic. Well, here's the thing, that's you can't out art photography, right? It's like the camera's always going to be more precise. And I think, and he made the point that we're at this moment with this type of technology. We can all strive to use AI to make our particular goals and get incrementally better. But what is that next frontier where someone is going to do this very differently? Some great examples are like, animals talk to each other all the time. We do not know how to talk to animals. Generative AI is very good at picking up patterns. Can humans learn to talk to animals? Can it understand other types of intelligence? Because an octopus has like 8 brains, right? And so like, we don't even understand. We think intelligence is about things that look and act and talk like us. But there's other kinds of intelligence in the world that we don't classify as intelligence because they are not like us. And so when you have an octopus who can change its skin texture and like changes colors according to music, and in their every tentacle is essentially millions of neurons, we don't know what that kind of intelligence looks like. When you have networks of plants whose root systems can talk to each other, we don't know what that system of intelligence looks like. Can we start to use AI, like just in this example, in biological sciences to help us really understand the world, the physical world where we live in? Are there going to be new elements that are going to be discovered? Are there going to be new drugs, right? Like, I think those are things that I think the only failure is the failure of imagination. And so being able to really lean into our imagination and let AI be one of the tools to expand on that, I think is much more interesting and much more advantageous to advance the civilization than to be like, well, how can I get my employee who is now doing 2 tasks per minute to go from 2 tasks to like 3 tasks per minute? So
that's wild. I'm so glad you're there. And I'm so glad you've been our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. Thank you so much for hanging out with us for this hour.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? Did you know that there's a technology that uses sound waves that'll tell your brain what to do? There literally is. It's called newcalm.com. It can tell your brain to heal, tell your brain to sleep, tell your brain to do all kinds of things. It can get you fired up. It can be a pre-workout. Newcalm.com. And the promo code is Mike15. Newcalm.com, promo code Mike15 for an extra 15% off. Go today.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at the Mike Litton Experience.